What is the most terrifying thing that every human being is faced with at some point during their lives? Some of you watching this video might think the answer is death, because as biological beings, we come with an existential L hard-coded into our genetic systems, which is why escaping death is such a huge theme in fiction and in Berserk as well. But we'd argue that the most terrifying thing that every person has to contend with at least once in their lives, be it early on or in their twilight years, is a reckoning with their own inner darkness. All humans possess the capability to inflict pain and commit acts of evil. Carl Jung preferred to call this side of a person their shadow selves. Kentaro Miura calls it the beast of darkness. The beast was not a defining part of Guts' personality early on. In fact, we don't even see it make an appearance or influence his thoughts in any way, shape, or form for over 100 chapters of the story. So when it does finally manifest in his mind, it is almost always a cause for concern, and it most certainly is in the most recent chapter of Berserk. But what exactly is this lupine figure, and how does it influence Guts' life? Is it real, or is it all in his head? We're here to answer all that and more. This is the Beast of Darkness's origins. Explore. He has always been teetering on the brink of sanity and lunacy. Guts' struggles with mental health before the eclipse. Guts and struggling with mental health might sound like an alien concept to you, but that's only if you know of Berserk on a superficial level. Guts' journey as the struggler isn't merely against the very idea of fate, it's also against himself. From the very moment we meet him in the Black Swordsman chapter, we know that this guy has been through some major crap in his life for him to be actively seeking out demon sheiks to slap and kill. His reckless abandon for his own body in battle and edgelord supreme demeanor is what sucked in most fans towards Berserk in those early days. But it was also clear that this epic tale was also going to address the root of those issues as it unfolded beyond the Black Swordsman arc. And address those issues it did by showing us that Guts has literally only known misery his entire life. He was born from the lifeless hanging corpse of his birth mother and would have probably died had Shisu not picked him up and slapped some life into him. He had to watch the woman who raised him for the first 3 years of his life die due to the plague right in front of his eyes, and all he could do was hold her hand to ease the pain of her passing. He was thrust into battle as a 6-year-old by the man he thought was his father, sold out for a menacing knight for only 3 coins by the same man, and generally put in every possible situation that would get him killed, violated, or both. But Guts is a man who carries the tag of struggler, and that's what he's been doing his entire life. He survived growing up in a brutal mercenary camp, getting violated, and even getting betrayed by Gambino for being the perceived source of all the former mercs' ills. Even on autopilot, Guts was strong enough to orchestrate an effective escape from his now former comrades, and strong enough to hold off an entire pack of wolves before passing out and being found by another mercenary group who took him along for yet another blood-smeared ride. Guts had no reason to feel guilty about the circumstances of his escape or afraid of what Donovan had done to him because he had taken his revenge on both of them before fleeing the scene. But that is not how Guts viewed things in his own mind, and this is the genesis of his struggles with mental health. Donovan's assault leaves Guts with severe PTSD, to the point that he violently lashes out at people who try to touch him in his adolescent years. He had heard Gambino's reasons for trying to kill him, but he mentally blamed himself for being a burden and accepted responsibility for everything Gambino had accused him of in a drunken stupor. Guts had immense baggage even before he joined the Band of the Falcon, which was made even more evident by the fever dream he had after his first loss to Griffith. In this dream, Guts was being chased by Donovan, who looked like an apostle. He rushed towards Gambino, who was sitting on a hill of corpses, and asked for his father's help, but Gambino simply blamed Guts for taking his right leg and dismissed him as a creep who no one would want to help, not even Shisu, who was a dog in this nightmare of Guts's. He then relives the traumas of that night when he was 9, and this happens again and again every time Guts is on the brink of death. The only thing that keeps him from lashing out that night is Casca, who was warming his body as he had lost a lot of blood after Griffith nearly pierced his heart, and that becomes a recurring theme as well. Guts had only known the lonely path of survival throughout his formative years. He had faced abuse that no child should go through and was forced into living by the sword by a father who didn't even want him. He did not trust anyone, and he fought every battle as if it was his last. Usually, he came out the victor because he was simply a better fighter, but he would have died against Bezuso had he not cracked the Grey Knight's battle axe, and many other close calls would have been final ones without his trusted comrades. With the Band of the Falcon, Guts learned how to trust again, found a family for the first time, and even fell in love, though he didn't admit it to himself immediately. He became so empowered as a person that he dared to dream for himself, where he had always clung to someone else before in a desperate bid to verify his own existence. It sounds ironic, but the more he fought and bled under Griffith's banners, the more he healed as a human being. The Band of the Falcon was completely unlike any other mercenary group Guts had worked with, and the sheer youthfulness of Griffith's ragtag crew of warriors is what ended up making him saner by comparison. He stopped lashing out when people touched him. He made friends and played dice and gambled with his men, drinking himself silly after big victories. He became, in every sense of the word, happy, and then he fell in love. The Wounds chapters are the ones that make people claim Berserk is a love story, and rightly so, because it is peak exploration of human vulnerability in the manga series you would least expect it to come from. Guts' coupling with Casca does not begin as the magical dream everyone wants it to be. He starts off extremely aggressively with her. He immediately puts her on her belly so she can't see him, and he nearly chokes her out with his inhuman strength, not on purpose, but by accident. Guts starts hallucinating about his childhood traumas, and it makes sense because this is the first time he's getting consensual love and reciprocation. He breaks down in tears because Donovan and Gambino still had a strong hold over him, and he admits to Casca that he killed his own father, something he never shared with anyone else. Guts thinks that he has shamed himself and Casca by doing what he just did, and offers to ride off into the night, never to be seen again, which is when Casca hugs him from behind and gives the Wounds chapter their ingenious names. She tells Guts that if all they can do is lick their wounds, so be it, and that she too would like a wound from him someday. This moment of unrequited acceptance makes Guts accept that humanity does exist in this world, and that even he, a kinslayer, is worthy of love. Guts becomes his most confident and relaxed self after affirming his love for Casca and riding out to save Griffith, because where he couldn't stand up to Zod a couple years back, he was now 1v1ing Wild. Despite knowing that Griffith would no longer be the man he once was, Guts accepts this, and thinks to himself that as long as he has Casca by his side, everything would be fine. He is miffed at her when she suggests he take off again after rescuing Griffith because he doesn't want to do that. She has become the anchor for his sanity without him even realizing it, but perhaps he should have, because what happens next undoes all the progress Guts makes over the years of his association with the Band of the Falcon. The Eclipse, the conception of the Beast of Darkness. While Guts might have progressed immensely in the years since he joined the Band of the Falcon, the story shows the exact opposite happening to the Yang to his Yin. Griffith rides high in the early stages of the Golden Age arc, grabbing everything he wished to achieve with his ambitious hands, even peerage and acceptance into the royal military. He manages to woo the princess, giving him direct access to the throne, and even takes out everyone who might oppose his ascension in a single fiery move. Everything was playing out according to his plans, but he didn't expect Guts to be the rogue element in his life. In hindsight, this is hypocritical because in the first numbered chapter of Berserk, Griffith claims that he plans even for the impulsive side of Guts during every engagement, so he should have known Guts was impulsive enough to give up peerage and a pretty penny just to go find his own purpose in life. Because Griffith couldn't stomach the idea that someone who was supposed to be in his grasp had managed to free himself of it, he spiraled and lost everything in a heatless night of passion with Princess Charlotte. He was captured and charged with treason the next morning, thrown into a dungeon, and tortured to insanity every night for a year. When Guts arrived to save Griffith, he couldn't even think that he was there to help him. To Griffith, Guts had become the source of his existence and the core of his malice. He was sustained through the inhuman torture inflicted upon him by Midland's royal torturer, by the thoughts of his dream, and Guts alone. He tries to strangle Guts the moment he realizes who has arrived to save him, but this goes unnoticed by the latter. Perhaps if Guts had kept his own emotions and thoughts aside, he'd have seen the warning signs that were brewing underneath Griffith's torture mask. Though he had been freed from a terrifying fate, Griffith couldn't accept the fact that he could no longer pursue his dream. He acted out first by trying to kill Guts, then by trying to force himself on Casca. When both failed, his mind finally broke and he rushed to a lake, west to the border of Midland, where he tried to commit suicide. He failed at doing even that, and Griffith started laughing like a maniac, which is when his Crimson Behelit it return to him just like Zod told him it would. Without thinking or any hesitation, he picked it up, allowed his blood in despair to flow into it, and activated an interstice, triggering the demonic ritual known as the Eclipse. During this ritual, Griffith was approached by the God Hand with the offer to join them in exchange for the lives of his comrades, and the only person who stood up for him was Guts. Even in a dimension made out of tormented faces and filled with hideous demonic reincarnations, Guts put 10 toes down and spat back venom in Void's face, telling him there was no way Griffith would become one of them. He'd even seen the guy naked, and Griffith didn't have so much as a tail, which is not untrue if you've read the Prelude chapters. Guts vehemently believes that his leader, the White Falcon, who has inspired him to find his own path, brought love and friendship into his life, and given him purpose without even knowing he did so, will make the right choice and not sacrifice his comrades to literal devils in exchange for power. But he wasn't exactly paying attention to what Griffith was saying when he inspected him for a tail during an impromptu water fight, because the warning signs had always been there. In that courtyard tussle, Griffith had told Guts that he received the Behelit from a fortune teller who told him that he could use it to obtain the world in exchange for his own flesh and blood. Then Zod warned Guts that when Griffith's ambition collapses, a death he could never escape from would pay him a visit. Skull Knight was more direct with his warning, as he told Guts that the eclipse was just over the horizon the night he departed the Band of the Falcon, and that his unkingly half would somehow be responsible for it. We know this unkingly half to be a reference to Griffith, but explaining that to Guts when he was in the middle of nearly pissing his pants is a bit too much to ask. Instead, he finds out just how wrong he had been about his role model firsthand, as Griffith sacrifices the gathered members of the Band of the Falcon and ascends to becoming a demonic God Hand member. Guts initially rejects the idea that Griffith went through with it willingly, and he tries to hack into the cocoon that his former leader had been trapped within, maniacally trying to cut him out of it. When reality sinks into Guts' guts, he resigns himself to the only thing he can do: fight. He turns his gaze from Griffith and the God Hand towards the swarm of apostles stampeding and feasting on his comrades, and he loses himself in a blinding rage. Guts breaks the horn off of an apostle and turns into a killing machine, disregarding all the damage being done to his body whilst carving a bloody path out of his opponents. He keeps at it until he arrives in the same lake as before, which has now been dyed red by the blood of his comrades, and he lets out a primal howl, which is somewhere between a cry and a scream. Guts frantically looks for any survivors at all and is delighted to see Gaston, his second in command, walking up to him. But his delight turns into instant grief and rage as Gaston is killed by an apostle that has entered his body, and then one of his future nemeses, the Slug Count, tries to lure him to his death using his tag partner Pippin's body as bait. Guts fights mercilessly, hacking and slashing and stabbing his way through an endless wave of apostles when he finally sees something that makes his onslaught stop dead in its tracks. There, far off in the distance, Casca had been ensnared by at least a dozen apostles, all of which were more than eager to violate her before devouring her as a sacrifice. He tries to leap towards her in an effort to help her, but another development knocks the pace out of his feet. Just as he tries to rush to Casca and the apostle grabbing her tries to assault her viciously, a massive thump, like an ominous heartbeat, is heard throughout the interstice. Griffith emerges from his cocoon as the fifth Demon King, the Wings of Darkness, Femto, and his first act as a newly reborn demonic entity was to immediately establish his dominance over Guts by violating Casca. Guts had refused to put the blame for things on Griffith at the start of the eclipse, but now Griffith became the very source of his life's greatest pain. He was forced to watch as the man he admired defiled the sanctity of the woman he loved, and as he tried to free himself to save Casca, he ended up hacking his own arm off in a scene that can only truly be called berserk. Guts passes out before he can do something about Griffith taking his girl right in front of him, and he is technically saved from death by the Skull Knight, who intervenes and escapes with the branded couple. But the damage to his mind had already been done. Guts is a guy who had always been struggling with keeping his head on straight, and after surviving a traumatic event like that, it was too much to ask of him to remain cool. But he somehow manages to do just that. Except for that run into the woods where he broke down completely and the realization that Casca's demon child was actually his, Guts doesn't really show any signs of suffering a mental breakdown down like Casca so overtly does. Instead, the change in his personality is more subtle because he just becomes more like himself. After packing armor, an arm cannon, and Dragon Slayer from Godot's home and dispatching of the Hound Apostles for a blessed start to his journey, Guts sets out on a one-man war against all demonkind, with his end goal being simple: the death of Griffith. Over the course of 2 years, he takes out numerous apostles and their pseudo-minions to the point he earns the nickname of the Black Swordsman amongst their ranks. Guts pretty much doesn't care what happens to the people around him or himself, but he still has one line he hasn't crossed: harming children. In the Black Swordsman arc, the only thing that gave us a hint that there was a human inside this beast of a man was the way Guts reacted every time he inadvertently caused harm in a child's life. In the second prelude chapter of Berserk, Guts unwillingly hitches a ride with an old man and his granddaughter. He warns the old man that he is an omen that attracts dark spirits, but the latter refuses to take no for an answer. The malign spirits of the dead end up possessing his granddaughter and kill the old man through her, so Guts is forced to kill the child as well. He takes her head off her shoulders with an easy motion, but the vomiting that comes later shows you how truly disgusted he was with what he had just done. Then later, during his fight with the Slug Count, yes, he uses Teresia as a hostage to bait the Count into overextending himself, and yes, he goads her into swearing revenge against him for killing her beloved daddy, but you can see the regret in his eyes as he steps out of the Count's fallen castle. Guts still had remorse for some of the things his journey of destruction was forcing him to do, but that had started evaporating towards the Lost Children arc. And then, during the arc itself, because he thought he was going soft, Guts ended up remorselessly killing scores of children who had been turned into pseudo-apostles by Rosine. Sure, they were nasty pseudo-apostles who were essentially in service to the God Hand, given the inherent nature of apostles themselves, but they were still children, and Guts had never really looked into whether one could reverse the process of creating an apostle or a pseudo-apostle in the first place. He protected Jill by going out of his way and playing defensive until he reached the Misty Valley, but when he was forced to spend his Night of Terrors by himself after yet another falling out with Puck, this time Guts wasn't haunted by the usual complement of dead jerks. Instead, it was the souls of the children he'd just killed, all on fire, as his own demon child manifested in the campfire he had made for himself. Guts immediately shifts blame for these kids coming back to haunt him on the demon child and tries killing it immediately. When that fails, he spends the night killing the fiery dead souls of the children he had lain to rest just that morning and doesn't despair a single bit over it. Guts' fight with Rosine shows him at his most unhinged in our opinion, because despite knowing that his opponent was a literal child, Guts chooses to treat her like any other apostle. Tactically, it's the right call, but it becomes morally questionable after the fight is over. And even during it, Guts is more unhinged than usual. He puts out a fire by slicing through a cocoon incubating a pseudo-elf and emerges from the inferno clutching the pseudo's intestine in his jaws. It is one of the most disconcerting panels depicting Guts because you can truly tell how far lost he is in his battle lust in that moment. After he defeats Rosine, he stumbles over to her dying body fully intending to finish the job, despite knowing that she would die either way. The only reason he doesn't go through with it is because Zepik shoots him with a crossbow before he can get the job done, and Guts is forced to flee from the Holy Iron Chain Knights once again. It is during his nighttime escape from his pursuers, devoid of the generally aloof presence of Puck, that we see the Beast of Darkness emerge for the first time. It starts off as dead spirits taunting Guts about all the children he just killed, only to ensure his own survival. Then it turns into something more menacing, as the spirits take on a wolfish demeanor and start stalking Guts as if it were his inner reflection. The Beast of Darkness questions the morality of Guts' actions and taunts him by saying that it knows he stinks of darkness. As long as he is standing on his own 2 feet, adamant on walking this path of vengeance, the beast is going to burn within him like a dark flame, thirsting for blood with every stroke of his sword. The more he kills, the more it sates the beast, but the more its appetite grows as well, until finally it will consume everything Guts has, leaving him all alone and taking his place instead. He would become a lifeless machine of death and destruction, or perhaps he could become a monster himself instead. The Beast of Darkness taunts Guts by saying he could become a real monster like his friend, referring to the Behelit at the Black Swordsman's side and morphing itself into a silhouette of Femto's disgusting dome. But Guts resists this temptation. He swings for the Femto mask because he knows that this is just the dead spirits trying to break him down so they'd have an easier time consuming him as he was a demonic sacrifice. Guts falters because of his severely weakened state and is saved from being overrun by evil blobs by Puck of all people, which is such a ridiculous ridiculous development that even Guts has to laugh and admit the hilarity of it all. He gives up and admits that he can't keep tense around the elf, and that Puck has some medicinal value after all. So he calls the elf by his name for the first time and accepts his companionship. Guts is pretty much in control of himself when he's with someone whom he knows and trusts, but as soon as he is left alone with his own thoughts, the beast rears its head again. After escaping the Holy Iron Chain Knights and leaving their commander with a crippling case of existential crisis, Guts returns to Godot's hut, having received a warning from the demon child about Casca being in danger. He learns that indeed Casca had escaped Godot's enchanted ore mine and had been missing for a few days now. Guts snaps at Rickert for being careless, but is put in his place by Godot himself, who chastises him for allowing things to have come this far. Godot rightly points out that every time Guts is given the choice to pick between irreplaceable bonds and the solitude he has known his entire life, he always chooses the latter. And so, Guts only has himself to blame for his current situation. But Guts thinks that Godot can't understand what he has been through, lying down on his comfy bed, attended to by a caring daughter and apprentice. He thinks that no one but he himself can understand the true horror of the eclipse. And that night, when he goes to try and sleep in the protected cave, the beast comes out to play again. Guts is having difficulty sleeping, as he usually does, and he thinks back on what Godot said earlier in the day. Immediately, he has a flashback of the eclipse, and he starts thinking to himself that he cannot forget the last thing seared into his right eye. Guts claims that even if it is malice or fear, or both, that keep him moving, he will see this through until the bitter end. And the beast in his mind claims that the blood will flow, and there is nothing Guts can do to stop it. Guts manages to pull himself back from his own dark thoughts by musing on Godot's wisdom for another moment, and realizing that it was indeed his fault that Casca had run away, because he was the one who decided to abandon her in the first place. Guts was about to give in, thinking that his wrath and malice were the only flames keeping him burning, but the campfire of dreams from his glory days with the Falcons also willed him to keep moving forward. He resolves to rescue and protect Casca as soon as he gets a lead on her, and never let her out of his sight again. But once he is reunited with her, Guts ends up becoming one of the biggest reasons for her continued regression. After living through the absolute nightmare that was the incarnation ceremony, Guts, Casca, and Puck embark on a journey towards Puck's home, the magical island called Elfhelm, where Casca would be able to live safely and without attracting too much attention to her brand. But where Guts used to fight his nightly terrors alone, now he had to do it whilst protecting a practically mindless child, and the stress was getting to him. He tried to fend off for the both of them as much as he could, but the onslaught of dead spirits had doubled in intensity now that the branded pair was traveling together. Guts was pretty unhinged when he fought these dead spirits, as we've already mentioned, but now he had to consciously check himself. On top of that, Casca would frequently try to run away from him. On one particular occasion, she ran into some thugs who tried to assault her, and though Casca was able to kill them off out of sheer instinct, she couldn't have anticipated that the biggest threat to her in that moment would be her protector himself. See, ever since the eclipse, the thing Guts had yearned for the most was Casca. During their first night in Godot's cave as a pair of branded individuals, Guts ends up almost kissing Casca out of sheer lust, but controls himself knowing that it would be the wrong thing to do given her mental state. However, after spending days on end fighting off evil ghosts and worse, and nearly losing Casca once again, when Guts saw her naked and covered in the blood of the bandits she'd just killed, something snapped within him. He forced himself on Casca, and we learned that that thing was the Beast of Darkness. Guts' inner malice was bringing out his primal lust in the worst way imaginable, encouraging him to tear her, penetrate her, and rip her to shreds, just like Griffith did. The beast calls Casca a sacrifice and urges Guts to make everything food for his malice as he hallucinates the beast having taken Casca's head off. This jerks Guts back to his senses as he realizes what he was about to do, but the damage had already been done. When Casca told him she wanted a wound from him back in the Wounds chapter, it wasn't meant in this fashion, and Guts realizes just how far he had allowed himself to fall in a moment of weakness. This is why he agrees to taking on Serpico, Isidro, and Farnace as traveling companions, and later Shirke and Ivalira as well, because he's terrified of what he might do if he's left to his own devices. Guts had always struggled with his mind, but it was clear to him now that it was reaching its breaking point, and if he didn't surround himself with people he could trust, the Beast of Darkness might just cause him to go on a rampage he didn't intend to go on. Guts comes a long way from his adolescence when he would just refuse help and take everything on by himself, but leave it to Miura to turn his greatest weakness into his greatest strength as well. You see, with with Berserk upping its apostle power scaling with the introduction of the metallic centaur Locus, the bestial archer Irvine, and the literal fire-breathing dragon Grunbeld, Guts was going to need something more than just Dragonslayer and Elfdust if he wanted to survive going up against Griffith's army. Unfortunately for him, it just means relying on his Beast of Darkness that much more. The Berserker Armor and the Beast of Darkness. Is the beast real? How will it affect Berserk's future? The Berserker Armor is a fetish that can unlock its wearer's peak fighting potential. It can make pain inconsequential and weight such a foreign concept that you could probably swing Dragonslayer one-handed while wearing it. But such power comes at a lethal cost, and we're not just talking about all the physical drawbacks of the Berserker Armor. Sure, getting your broken limbs rearranged by force and held in place by piercing needles sucks, but the worst part about the Berserker Armor is the ominous ode it is imbued with. The creator of this armor, Hanar, made it so that its wearer would only register the most violent emotions in their hearts in order to make them unstoppable warriors. But in doing so, he also inadvertently built in a handicap. Every time the wearer of the Berserker Armor allowed it to take over their consciousness, it would amplify their inner malice 1,000-fold. And in Guts' case, that meant him becoming chained to the will of the Beast of Darkness. Every time Guts goes berserk, his thoughts devolve to single-word acts like kill, burn, destroy, annihilate, and they're all supplied by the Beast of Darkness. There is a reason that his Berserker Armor's visor resembles the Beast of Darkness's lupine mug. It's because the Beast is a reflection of his raging inner malice. Guts manages to break out of his Berserker state thanks to Shirke, but every time he re-enters that state, the Beast's hold over him increases ever so slightly. He experiences the torrent of violent emotions that his mind becomes when he goes berserk on the Makara before entering Vritannis, and also realizes that without Shirke or the Moonlight Boy keeping his sanity anchored quite literally, the Beast would make the Red Wedding look like rainbows in sunshine. In chapter 290, the Beast of Darkness and Guts come to a sort of understanding where the Beast acknowledges the fact that Guts now has the warm lights that keep him burning besides his rage in the form of his comrades. He scoffs at Shirke, thinking she has tamed him, but the moment Guts acquired the Berserker Armor, the Beast had already been released. Guts might cling to his companions like chains that anchor him to his humanity, but the Beast knows that sooner or later he will repeat the same mistakes he always makes. What happened at the eclipse will happen to his companions again, and that is why they will go after the true light that burns them, aka Griffith. The Beast of Darkness claims it will stay restrained and obey Guts' will for now as it stalks off into the corners of his mind, and surprisingly enough, it actually does. During Guts' battle with the Sea God's tentacles, the Beast briefly takes control of Guts' psyche, but the Moonlight Boy's presence and Shirke's powerful magic manage to bring him back. In fact, Guts has to rouse the Beast and chastise him for laying down on the job in the heart chamber of the Sea God, which the Beast indulges with surprising ease. The Beast of Darkness doesn't even rear its head when Griffith shows up to attack Elfhelm, because we know Guts doesn't go berserk on that particular occasion. Instead, it shows up at the literal lowest moment of Guts' life. See, the Beast of Darkness isn't actually real. It's a mental construct that reflects the fractured state of mind that Guts has to push through on a daily basis in order to protect those he cherishes. So when you see it manifesting out of the Dragonslayer like a hellhound, you know that something is terribly wrong with Guts. In chapter 373, the Beast of Darkness taunts Guts for his weakness at not being able to protect Casca and tells him what he truly desires: power. The Beast tells Guts that his brand restrains him, that his flesh restricts him, all the while laughing at him, trying to get his bearings and hallucinating about his L to Griffith instead. The Beast tells Guts that if it's power he wants, then he should yield everything to him: his bones, his blood, his pain, even his soul. If he does that, then the implication is cut off by the arrival of some Kushan slavers, but we think the gist of it is pretty clear. Yield to the Beast, and Guts will finally be powerful enough to defeat Griffith. Stick to his humanity, and Guts will never be able to beat his mortal adversary, the one person he claims to be the only thing keeping him walking on his 2 feet, besides Casca, of course. Chapter 373 ended with Guts gripping the Dragonslayer, and the Beast attempting to unleash the Berserker as a few Kushan slavers look down at his seemingly hapless body. And we honestly feel sorry for them. Those poor guys have no idea what's about to hit them, but but to be frank with you, neither do we. So far, every time Guts has fallen off the edge, someone has pulled him back. This time, there's no one to do that, and it looks very likely that the Beast will end up winning out the battle for his soul against Casca. Berserk isn't set to return until July or August at the very least, so don't expect answers anytime soon, but if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments section down below. Marvelous verdict. But as for this video, that's gonna have to be it. The Beast of Darkness makes a handful of appearances throughout Berserk, but every time it pops up, you know some major shit is about to go down. That's what we felt reading chapter 373, because it had been literal years since we'd last seen the Beast. Who knows what will happen in chapter 374, but if you want to know what we think, check out our predictions video on the channel itself, and we'll see you guys in the next one.